Well, hey, you're not Brian
Hello there.
Carter.
I
You are
am
Brian
Brian
Carter.
Carter.
You're not Aaron
I'm not
Shaver.
Aaron. Yeah, not Aaron. I'm sorry to disappoint.
Well, yeah, it's going to be really confusing today. The other Brian.
Yeah.
Not everybody would know this, but Brian Carter, you and I, the other Brian today, you and I worked together back at a place long ago and far away, but awesome to have you on today. Thanks for joining.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks a lot for thinking of me for this. I'm really excited about it.
Cool. Well, we're today talking about tracking Bitcoin transactions, or maybe it's just tracking cryptocurrency transactions. There are a lot of cool things that I thought about. You were one of the first guests. You are our first guest doing this thing, coming on the show, and you were the first person that I wanted to come on as a guest. And Aaron was going to join us, but he got a better offer. He's doing something else today.
Some billable work from the sounds of it.
Yeah, something along those lines. Yeah, but wanted to bring you on. You've changed homes for where you're working, and you're at a company that kind of works in the space tracking cryptocurrency transactions. So I was hoping we could talk about that a little bit today. But introduce yourself to the folks out there, to the no less than 5 or 6 people that will watch this later today.
Yeah. So to the 5 or 6 people, my name is Brian Carter, and Brian Quick and Brian Carter were both born at a time when every boy was named Brian, and every girl
it was
was
the top
Jennifer.
10 name back in that whatever unspecified year that happened. Yeah.
And whenever I go to order a sandwich, like 5 other Brians come to pick it up when it's ready, So it's I have a sandwich name now, Sebastian, that I give, and nobody else comes up for Sebastian's sandwich. I get my own sandwich after that.
I love that. I talked in a prior episode about my internet birthday, and you've got a sandwich name that's very much like having an internet birthday, I guess. That's fantastic. I haven't thought about that before. I'm gonna have to try that probably.
Yeah. Don't use Sebastian, please.
Don't use Sebastian. Yeah. No.
So I've split my career working as an intelligence analyst, military law enforcement, and then kind of more recently been involved in computer network defense and security operations centers and threat intelligence stuff, where we're trying to learn and understand how to prioritize our work, and like there's so many competing priorities in what we do that I found that I really liked and cherished the kind of original research that we could do that helps us say, let's not worry about this thing over here that's going on that might be in the news, and instead focus our efforts over here on this thing that is a real problem in front of us today. And so part of that is, just knowing about cryptocurrency and the actors who are using it. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I will have no trouble asking dumb questions today, because I just know a tiny little bit about this topic. But before that, we are going to play our intro. And you and I had a special agreement that you would only come on the show today if I modified our intro a little bit. So I hope everybody enjoys this, and I hope I don't get a copyright strike from YouTube when this posts on their service today. So here we go. Yeah. Now, you know, you talked about us being born back in a year where everybody was named Brian. This is just, further hints at kind of the day and time that we came from, because, the young lads and lasses watching our show today are going to have no idea what that theme song comes from. And I don't think we should tell them either. I think it'll be a little inside reference for children of the 80s.
All right. Yeah, we'll leave it, let it be a surprise, and see how many people respond and say they binge watched that whole series on Netflix or something.
Yeah. So if you're on the chat today and you have a theory of what that theme song is, you can weigh in though and let us know. All right. Cool. So tracking Bitcoin transactions. On Aaron and I on the show the stream, have talked a lot about ransomware in particular, and I'm gonna go ahead and pop this up real quick. That's my whole screen. I didn't want that. Let's see. Share screen. Here we go. And so we've had this explosion of ransomware attacks over the last number of years. And I think, the little bit I know about cryptocurrency, I think, or I'll ask this as a question, would it be fair to say that there's a relationship between this explosion of ransomware that we've seen over recent years and cryptocurrency?
Yeah, it certainly has
and
made.
What is that relationship?
Yeah, right. It's really just made the process of extorting money from victims easier for criminals. But I really wouldn't want to characterize Bitcoin as part of the problem. It's really just sort of the tool that gets used for it. And years ago, when we were dealing with problems like fake antivirus that I know you're familiar with, you'd have to pay for that with a credit card. And there were all these kind of load balancing that the criminals would use to try to prevent their accounts from getting shut down. And they would allow a certain number of chargebacks and other kinds of things. And it was probably a lot of work for them to just get this, relatively small amount of money by comparison to what they're getting today with cryptocurrency. Yeah.
Right.
I hope that helps there.
So crypto's just made it easier to get the monies back and forth on this stuff. Okay. Is in terms of, well, I'll say this, I look at all these circles and if I remember, I like this graphic because it's really pretty, but it doesn't tell you it tells you something. It doesn't tell you everything about these ransomware attacks. Some of them were successful in that the victim, the Freudian slip there. The victim paid in some cases, didn't pay in other cases. I think on this chart, the size of these are just people who were attacked. And as it says up here in the corner, the size of the circle is the size of the organization, not necessarily, the size of the ransom that was paid. But I mean, probably all of these cases, there was some cryptocurrency either, requested or paid in the back end. Was that fair to say? I mean, that's my guess, but I think the space better. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, some of these ransomware operations, they're successful criminal enterprises that have brought in, over $100 million to their organizations. And so, yeah, that would be really interesting to see as kind of a comparison to that bubble chart, how the size of ransoms over the years that ransomware has been a thing, because it's certainly grown.
Yeah. And I'm saying Bitcoin in in the title, but I think that it's not exclusively, or it's not always Bitcoin. And can you tell me a little bit more about that? Is
Yeah, sure. So first, let me say, like, it's mostly Bitcoin and overwhelmingly mostly Bitcoin. I should say mostly it's Bitcoin. Mostly, that's kind of how I should say it.
okay.
Um, then, but there's also this interest in Monero that we see played out in certain ransomware groups that will only offer the amount and a payment address in Monero, and uh, and then sometimes the victim will say, "Hey, I can't get that much Monero in 2 days. Let's talk about Bitcoin," and then they'll do that, and they'll charge a penalty to use Bitcoin
Wow.
instead of Monero. But yeah, it's overwhelmingly Bitcoin. It's harder to get Monero from like a legit compliant exchange today. It's hard to get that volume of it, and so you might need to hire a company that already has it to make that payment in Monero for you. But that's one of the reasons that it hasn't really taken off in the ransomware space, is just that it's not as easy to get as Bitcoin is today.
I love, there's a word in there used that I love, compliant exchange.
Yeah.
Like, tell me about that. If they're
Yeah. So
compliant,
they're
I've never, knock on wood, I've never actually paid. I've never been in a situation where I ended up paying a cryptocurrency ransom myself. So uh, compliant versus not compliant. What does that all mean?
Yeah, it really means that in our kind of systems and language, and the way that we would describe an exchange depends on their willingness to do comply with the laws around knowing your customer, anti-money laundering, and some exchanges that are really successful today and well known. They're really good at that, and sort of on the forefront of uh, kind of making, even in the absence of kind of written frameworks around compliance for cryptocurrency, they're kind of creating that in order to fend off any sort of expensive non-compliance issues that would come as an audit finding, or some kind of legal basis for them not being able to continue operating or something like that, right?
Got it. Okay.
And so the opposite end of that is exchanges that aren't compliant. They don't collect any identity details. They don't care if you trade your local currency for a privacy coin like Monero. If you've got the money, they'll change it for whatever you want for a fee, right?
Got it. Okay. All right. So you've, as I mentioned, you've changed jobs, and you're working for a company that has a service to help with Bitcoin transaction trading, um, and I know about as much about that as I know about cryptocurrency, which is that I know like names of things.
Okay.
So I don't have any. My barber, I think, has Bitcoin and Dogecoin, and I've been in all sorts of conversations where people compare and talk about what cryptocurrencies that they're involved in. And I know that this Chainalysis, who you work for, has has software, has a service that assists with that tracking, but that's kind of the extent of. I think I've just said everything that I know about tracking cryptocurrency. So, like, what's interesting, what should we know about tracking crypto, and why would you do that, and how would you do that?
Yeah, great question. I would say, like, before I started working with this company's tools, Chainalysis, this tool that I work with is called Reactor. And before I started working with it, I thought I knew a little bit about Bitcoin, because I bought Bitcoin, mined Bitcoin, used it to purchase things in crime markets, and and I thought I was pretty well informed. And then when I started looking at Reactor and getting the training around it, I'm like, yeah, I know nothing about cryptocurrency. And especially when it comes to altcoins, like you mentioned Dogecoin, and there's hundreds or thousands of those altcoins out there. Not all of them are relevant today, but yeah, there's a whole world out there that's kind of way outside the scope of what my experience in really just trying to understand it for crime markets and ransomware and stuff like that. I can share a graph if you want to see an example there. Let me see if I can. Yeah. Pull this up. There, yeah. So this is a graph that I did a long time ago when you and I worked together that involves SamSam ransomware. A local company here was doing a lot of response work for hospitals that had been victims of SamSam, and they were giving me these addresses that that the criminals were providing to the victims to make payments to decrypt their files. And so after looking at several of these, I noticed that many of these victims were paying into wallets that eventually ended up in this this cluster here. That back then it was just an address, just a single address here instead of this name. And so I took the kind of really powerful analytical step of Googling that address and found
that Bitcoin address.
Yeah, that Bitcoin address. Yeah, exactly. Thanks for that. And then finding that this person named Mohammed Gorbanian was kind of operating his own exchange where he would take your Bitcoin and turn that into other digital currencies like web money that's popular in Russia. Just about anything, any digital currency or cryptocurrency you can think of, he was changing it back and forth. And he had a Telegram channel that I joined, and I could see, you know, like he's doing this every day, like telling people his positions and different currencies so that people could know how to trade with him, and probably not complicit in the crime necessarily, but he was certainly handling a high volume of money from the SamSam operators and probably turning that into local currency for them to spend in their home country. So this is one example of where we can find maybe an enforcement opportunity that you might not expect. So this person's under kind of a sanctions today, and there's indictments against the SamSam operators, and a lot of that came from understanding, you know, where this cryptocurrency ends up ultimately. Another example of that I brought was finding out that some ransomware operators will ultimately kind of cash out, for lack of a better term. They receive cryptocurrency into their, you know, the software that manages their cryptocurrency, a wallet, and then immediately send that to an exchange where they can get local currency in their bank account. And so there's some examples of that here with Prolock, where they received a huge sum of money from a victim and then immediately divided that into 3 parts. And some of those, some of that cryptocurrency ends up at compliant exchanges where we can clearly see that, you know, there are enforcement opportunities there where a legal service could be sent to that exchange, and the exchange could say this account belongs to this person, this individual person. Yeah.
Enforcement opportunities meaning tell us who
meaning
the people are.
Yeah, tell us who the person who received this is, and then ultimately an indictment, a criminal complaint, or, you know, arrest or extradition, that kind of thing. That's what we're trying to help facilitate in this kind of workflow. Yeah, and it's also useful, I'll say, to understand relationships between ransomware operators and all the people involved in that. Ransomware is not just one thing that happens to, you know, represent, you know, lots of different sort of steps in this crime that happens, including people who offer initial access, people who sell accounts, people who are installing malware at a wide variety of different victims and then selling the juicy ones over to ransomware operators. And so we're really interested in understanding those relationships as well. People might come to us and say, hey, we heard that Maze ransomware rebranded as Egregore. Do you have anything to support that or not? And so some of the research that we would do to support that might say, looking at cryptocurrency transactions between the people that we know are involved with these ransomware families and kind of the common or mutual counterparties, there, and to say, yeah, we think there is among the affiliates, but the people we know who are maybe developers or the core crew of criminals involved in facilitating that ransomware as a service probably aren't involved in this other one, right?
This is
That's a really
that's the
common
old
thing.
follow the money, I think, right?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's also true that there's a wide range of discipline when it comes to spending cryptocurrency. And in this case, this middle case here, this guy, we might call this oops sec, like he made a mistake here in transferring money directly from his wallet to a compliant exchange. Like that's something that shouldn't have happened if he's trying to protect his identity. I'm saying he here, but should say they or something. Yeah, they. Um, and yeah, so yeah, there's lots of steps and kind of avenues and threads to pull here where we can collect information about the cryptocurrency transactions that helps us and our customers understand more about the criminal enterprise and look for opportunities for indictments, criminal complaints, arrests, sanctions, and then and also to help companies that produce original research around ransomware know about these relationships so that they can better inform their customers as well.
So you hit on something there, and I want to pull at it a little bit. Just a basic question of, so who's doing this work? I mean, it's super interesting, but in the cyber world, in my world of cyber buddies, you're the one person I know, that kind of that does this. I mean, I know that it's done, but you're the one person I know. I just maybe don't know the right, don't hang in the right crowds or know the right people. So, like, who's doing this work? It sounds like, law enforcement. There are law enforcement reasons that I might, want to do this kind of tracking. Are there other, like, who are the people that have this kind of interest in tracking the transactions?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one I got a lot when we were working together at Megacorp. It's just people would say, why do you need this tool? Like, you're not going to go and arrest these bad guys. What are you doing with it? And for us, it was really more about producing some original research around mainly around ransomware, but also other types of extortion that had an impact in that industry, and wanting to contribute something new and novel to the trust group that we were a part of,
right,
that really wanted to do some damage to that cycle of compromise, and to say, it wasn't always me sharing directly with law enforcement. It was often somebody, a response company, or somebody else who's dealing with the problem more directly that has a law enforcement connection. And then we all kind of gang up on the problem and share everything we can so that there's a better chance of some kind of enforcement happening.
Said generically, a reason would be threat intelligence, knowing your enemy, essentially, or knowing something more about your enemy.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I often framed it as like we're more likely to have some kind of law enforcement participation or tracking or resources committed to something if we can show them that for one thing, there's a victim or a criminal in the venue that we're bringing to them, and also that we can accumulate damages using this kind of analysis, where in some law enforcement agencies, they may not be willing to open up a criminal case for a problem that you have unless it exceeds a certain dollar figure of damages. And so accumulating those damages with multiple victims, and because it's also a pretty helpful way to kind of kick that process off, so to speak.
So it's a way to tie it up with a bow a little bit and say, like, here's the research part of it. Go.
Yeah.
go start
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what we
file the
hope. And
paperwork
yeah,
essentially.
yeah, right. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Hey, I have a question from the stream. How have the 5, 9, or 14 eyes, whatever your choices, affected digital currency transaction? And I could be wrong, but I think that I think that this goes back to um, I think this goes back to maybe like the what was it, the pipeline.
Oh, Colonial Pipeline.
Yeah, the Colonial Pipeline. There was a lot of question around um, how did that happen? Like people got crypto back,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and 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 so do you have a sense of like, is this tracking part of how that's happening, or do you have, or maybe even just share your conspiracy theories even. I have my own conspiracy theories around how those uh, cryptocurrency transactions got rolled back or unwound. But do you have any shareable answer on such a thing? How are agencies affecting those crypto transactions?
Yeah, there's a couple of avenues there, and one is kind of what we're doing here is following or doing the tracing to a point where we can kind of identify the infrastructure or a service provider that will give the money back to the victim. Um, the other part of that is really um, doing the incident response work and collecting all the forensic evidence that tells you that there are connections to this server, and in some cases that server also happens to be where valuable resources for the criminal enterprise are stored. I hear a lot of that. Reminds me, like, I hear a lot of things from um, SOC analysts and security professionals about projecting their own kind of ideas or sort of positions on how to conduct a crime on actual adversaries and criminals, and saying things like, "Oh, they wouldn't do that," and it's really not the case. I said earlier, there's a range of discipline when it comes to handling cryptocurrency, and there certainly is a range of discipline when it comes to how to store your cryptocurrency, where it's stored, is it accessible by law enforcement, and can you be identified by the things you do when you access victim environment and these kinds of things. Yeah.
Some people are better than others at conducting themselves inside of these criminal markets, I think is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. What else should we know?
Let me scroll up
near the end, but what else should we know about tracking
crypto? So unintentional segue there to how organizations or victims become dealing with ransomware, how they end up dealing with ransomware. I often see in comments when ransomware incidents are reported that they failed to do the basics, or it's about these kind of basic issues. And sometimes it might be, but it often isn't. It's not the kind of thing that we often see in regulatory frameworks or industry frameworks around compliance, like you have to do these 5 things. Our guidance around protecting ourselves from ransomware is often not specific enough to help people, And so if there was a pie chart around how organizations become victims of ransomware, the largest part of that would probably be unmanaged remote access, and things like having Microsoft RDP or Citrix or a VPN exposed to the internet in a way that allows the credentials to be purchased or guessed or stolen in some way that leads to access to that network where they can kind of roam about unfettered without bothering any security tools, like RDP right into a server, and then, look around the network and deploy ransomware, turn off antivirus and all that kind of thing. So, yeah, same. So this screenshot is an example from UAS, one of the largest markets for accounts that are specific to Microsoft RDP. And so you can go there and kind of do a search that sorts through the country and some of the properties of the server that you want access to. And then, you have quite a long list of servers to choose from there. Most people will use these for carding, like say, I have a credit card that I stole from somebody in Indianapolis. I'm going to buy an RDP in Indianapolis, and then it's less likely to trip some anti-fraud controls. But increasing number of initial access brokers will comb through all of these different accounts and try to find the juiciest ones for ransomware. And here's an example of that, where Citrix accounts are being sold in an auction on exploit.in, one of the top tier Russian language forums. And starting off at 30,000 with an increment of 2K. And then if you want to just buy it all now, it's $40,000 for these 115 Citrix accounts. So that's typically what we're looking at. So one account to a corporate network might be hundreds or a few $1,000s, and often described in terms like, here's the annual revenue and here's the number of employees. And sometimes you can figure out who it is based on that information. But yeah, that's the biggest part. Second to that is malware that gets on machines that are, receiving email. So this really common pattern of initial foothold types of malware or loader malware that eventually leads to ransomware. And the smallest part is probably vulnerabilities that have a CVE. We do see that quite often, but it's not nearly, it's a really small percentage compared to these other two avenues. And we don't see a lot of advice around that, specific to these RDP exposures and the loader malware. People aren't getting ransomware because they didn't update their antivirus. They're getting it because it got turned off, or it's not effective as we expect it to be or want it to be, right?
It's because they've got remote access hanging out on the internet, or a vendor that they're using has, their IT vendor maybe has that remote access hanging out there.
Yeah, right on.
Cool. Super interesting. I really I appreciate your time today, and maybe we'll there are so many cool things that we may want to have you back for one of the other topics in your portfolio. And even that second part, we talk a lot of discussion about ransomware, and that pie chart is an interesting topic as well. But appreciate you joining today, Brian. Other Brian.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, cool. The other Brian.
Thanks all. See you next week.